manufactures that company. The automobile dealer is a distributor. Likewise, alcohol, soda, bread, many products are distributed by distributor franchise agreements. And so they range in price. Obviously, for a BMW dealership, you're going to probably pay a pretty penny, right? But you'll probably pay less than $100,000 for a Schmidt bread distributorship, maybe far less, right? Maybe $60,000 for a Schmidt bread distributorship, depending on its cash flow, obviously. So they're fairly important. Some fairly significant pieces of equipment are distributed through distributorships. John Deere, the makers of farm equipment. When you buy these, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment, or just a simple lawnmower from a John Deere dealer, you're buying from a distributorship. Next are the chain style businesses like McDonald's. So this gives you the license to basically engage in a particular business at a location. Oh, I should mention about distributorships. You have territories. So, if you can get an exclusive territory, that's better than, a non-exclusive territory. That means no one else can sort of work within that range. But we're on now the chain style business operations. Basically, you are engaging in a business system, more control over how you do business when you have a chain style business. Your McDonald's will be subject to far more administration than your Schmidt bread distributorship, by far, right? So the important part to remember, though, is that you've got a powerhouse chain style operation like McDonald's. There is a level of security there that the business person is often willing to trade off for that control. And it certainly doesn't have to be just food service, right? There are other examples of chain style businesses like tax preparation services, H&R Block, et cetera, as cited in the book. Another type of franchise arrangements are manufacturing and processing plan arrangements. And so this is basically your Pepsi-Cola bottler franchise, right? The manufacturer of your Pepsi-Cola is not the Pepsi-Cola Corporation. It's Bob's Pepsi-Cola Bottling Company Incorporated, right? Why? That's a franchisee who has been transmitted the intellectual property of the recipe, a patented process to produce trade secret process to produce Pepsi-Cola. All right, that is a very valuable franchise, right? And it gives Bob's the right to both produce with the secret formula and then to market to distributors, right? And either, or market wholesale, right? Or retail, the products that Pepsi-Cola makes, that it also makes. Now, with regard to the regulation of franchising, so the main areas are contract law, certain federal regulations, and state regulation, right? The franchise itself is a licensing agreement, and as a contract, it's subject to contract law in the jurisdiction in which it is established, right? So that is one aspect. So state contract law, whatever that might be, will be directly applicable. Then there are a couple of things that one needs to take particular note of. There are a couple of things in federal law, and so these include things that are industry specific. For example, regulations over termination of automobile franchises, or it may be something that is more general. For example, the federal law preempts certain state laws regarding when a franchisor may cancel a franchisee's contract, when they can cancel that license. So there are limitations on that that are imposed by federal law instead of by state law. Now, the business opportunity that is represented by a franchise has a lot of trust that sort of has to be established, right? The 20th century saw so many different types of financial scams arise that there are federal disclosures that are required that are not dissimilar in at least intent and perhaps to some degree in flavor to a disclosure for a company trying to raise money on capital markets, like publicly traded companies, right? The Federal Trade Commission, as opposed to the SEC, since it's not technically a security, right? Although it has some of the feel of a security, right? A contract, except for you're making all of the money, right? But you're dependent on the brand of the licensor or franchisor. But the Federal Trade Commission basically requires disclosures that will be sufficient to enable a potential franchisee to determine whether this is a properly profitable potential investment, right? To make a well-informed decision in that regard, right? So there are specific federal disclosures. In addition, the same document, right, tends to be subject to state disclosures, which will also appear, and many of the requirements will overlap. But to the extent that state disclosures require things that are in addition to, or otherwise, pertinent to the disclosures that one would make in a federal disclosure, you got to add that stuff into. And this is a good place to underscore that if you're the entrepreneur that is developing a franchise, right? You don't have to be big all franchises start out small. If you want to be the franchisor, right, you need to consult with an attorney to help you navigate your way through that process, because that's not something you just want to do without consideration. You don't want to run afoul of federal and or state law, all right? So I mentioned termination a bit ago when I talked about federal laws governing termination. There are also state laws governing termination, and so termination itself deserves a bit of an emphasis just to sort of talk about it, because the franchisee, by definition, is legally independent of, but financially dependent upon the franchisor. So I'll just make you aware of example 30.4, case example 30.4. FMS Incorporated entered into a franchise agreement to become an authorized dealership for the sale of Samsung brand construction equipment. Samsung then sold its construction equipment business to Volvo Construction Equipment North America, which was to continue selling Samsung brand equipment. Later, Volvo rebranded the construction equipment under its own name and canceled FMS's franchise, right? FMS sued, claiming that Volvo had terminated the franchise without good cause. Without good cause. This concept of good cause, it flows throughout many of the state laws in particular that govern franchise terminations, right? And good cause may be defined per statute. In this case, FMS claimed that Volvo terminated them without good cause, and they violated state law. Because Volvo was no longer manufacturing the Samsung equipment, the court found that Volvo could legally terminate FMS's franchise, right? But if they had continued making the Samsung equipment, then FMS would have had a good case, barring some other good cause that they would have to argue in order to win there. So just to kind of recap, that protects them from arbitrary cancellations of their franchise because there is a financially dependent relationship. It's a potentially abusive, no, that's the wrong word. It is a potentially problematic relationship if the roles and boundaries are not clear, which is why it is very important to have a franchise contract that meets the needs of both parties. The franchisor is usually very well taken care of. The franchisee will always have a lawyer look at the franchise agreement. Always. You have to understand what it is that you are entering into. And the words on the page themselves may have some experience, right, with how those words actually play out in the law. And so it's important to kind of get a sense of that if you're entering into that type of arrangement. The different provisions as they are in the contract, right? The things that need to be addressed include, for example, what is it that you're paying, obviously. If you're buying, a franchise from Jackie, whose sole proprietorship is now selling franchises, right? And at that point, Jackie would have moved on from sole proprietorship, right, for her craft store. But in that case, you are going to pay some amount. It's not going to be as much as a McDonald's, but it's going to be some amount to Jackie. What does that payment represent, right? What do you get with it? You need to have a clear understanding of that. What is Jackie promising when she sells you the right to use her intellectual property, right? What intellectual property is included? What is she promising to do? In some franchises, you're basically left to your own devices. Hey, you have the right to distribute our bread. Pickups are at thus and so. I mean, you can sell as much as you can sell, or as long as we've got supply, right? But if you don't show, we'll give somebody else a swing at it. But if you show, you'll continue to sell. We promise to make the bread available, up to your reasonable requirements, right? We promise to provide administrative support. What are they? We promise to provide marketing of our bread products so that you can find more outlets within your territory to distribute. What exactly are they promising? Are they warranting anything, right? Some franchises will have more promises than others because some businesses are more complex than others. Some might be fairly simple. Maybe you're just getting the right to sell a particular product and the product is what it is. You're getting the right to sell makeup, right? If it's a franchise, you have to buy the product and buy the intellectual property that allows you to sell that makeup, right? The other promises would relate to other areas of that business that, it could be any number of things depending on what that business is. For that reason, the agreement can be somewhat complex. Is this a brick and mortar business? Then you have to deal with location, right? And if it is a rental, right, there are certain issues that come up. If it is a build out of owned property, who owns the real estate? If it's in like McDonald's and all of the real estate is owned by the franchisor, then you've got a lease agreement to deal with, right? So there'll be lease provisions or a separate lease agreement. Control issues. There'll be quality control by the franchisor, and there should be if they're representing that all of these products, no matter where you go, are comparable. Then there's got to be a minimum level of quality control. You, as the franchisor, need to make sure that that control exists. As a franchisee, you need to make sure that you understand what is the means of control, right, and what is the degree of control. So those are two different things, all right, and they need to be understood by the franchisee, especially. Pricing arrangements, because this is a franchise, right? There may be there may be some issues that need to be addressed. And that will include with regard to the products themselves, and including things like the supplies. Some franchisees, and this kind of goes back to control, are subject to different types of arrangements. And some you have to buy all of your goods, all of your ingredients, all of your supplies, everything from the franchisor, right? And that makes sense if you want to see your enterprise have consistent qualities and your products or services to have consistent